anxious to say there's not enough time, but there is. And your essay is going to be much more succinct and much more understandable if you take that thinking time. And what happens, by the way, is you'll get your essay in a bifold, and you'll open it up. And this is an improvement over a couple of years ago. So you got lined paper here, and here is the question. And the question maybe takes up a half a page, often less, sometimes a little bit more. And there's a box, a blank box down here. Okay? And this is the area where you may write notes to yourself about answering the question. And there's an instruction there to the reader that says, do not score any information in the box. So you can say stupid things, you can say anything you want, okay, and that becomes your answer. So then you start writing your answer here. Turn the page, by the way, and the question is repeated for you. So you never don't have the question in front of you. Okay, it's always right there for you to refer to, which I think is a really good idea. It used to be that they put the question in a one folder, and then you had your answer paper in the other one. Okay, this is much better. It's always there on the page right in front of you. Write in simple declarative sentences. You're not trying to win the Pulitzer Prize here. You're trying to convey your understanding. They must be sentences. If you write in a bulleted outline, that's okay. You can put bullet marks if you want. Makes no difference. But if what comes after the bullet, okay, is not in sentence form, then you don't get credit. So if you write, the IV of this experiment is the dosage of the drug, that scores. If you write IV dash drug dosage, guess what? Doesn't score. Okay, that's the operational definition of an essay. Okay, you have to have complete sentences. Subjects are good, verbs are good, direct objects are nice. Hell, throw in an adverb occasionally. Put in a couple of adjectives, but make sure you have subjects and verbs for everything you write. It can be accurate, but if it's not in the form of a complete sentence. And the reason we're so firm on that rule is because then everybody can do it the same. You don't have one reader here and say, oh, I'll give credit for that, and a reader over there saying, nope, that's not a complete sentence. So you set a rule that everybody can apply and everybody can apply quickly. Okay? And it's fair for everybody when you do it that way. Okay? Organize your answer into paragraphs. There's little you can do that would increase the likelihood that the reader would miss a point that you've earned than to write your entire essay in one big block paragraph. Now, I can't tell you what percentage of that time it happens. I know it's probably 20% of the time. You just get one solid paragraph. Whoa! Okay, with no break. Now, most of the essays have bulleted subpoints to cue you to what you're supposed to write about. And your good rule of thumb is each one of those bullets deserves its own paragraph. Its own paragraph. Okay? And in one way, instead of writing one cohesive essay like you would for English, you're writing little mini essays, each one paragraph long, each they're referring to a particular topic that you're asked to write. Best answers are usually about a page and a half. This is just an intuition I've had. Questions that seem long, questions that seem short, students that write big, students who write small. Year after year, the best answers I read fill up this page and trickle over about halfway through the next page. I don't know why, but it is. If they're shorter than that, they're leaving out important things, they're not convincing me, they know what they're talking about. If they're longer than that, there's a bunch of BS in there that I have to wade through. Okay, the best ones are almost always about a page and a half long. And finally, this is like erasing with multiple choice, right, legibly. The slide I'm about to show you is absolutely illegal. I shouldn't have done it. They don't show it to other people. They could throw me in jail or fire me, I don't know. But this is an actual student handwriting sample from a few years ago. I love the look on your faces. And the odd thing is that you can make out words. All the way through there, you can make out words. And I love the fact that the student is drawing this arrow to clarify what he or she means.
But are you allowed to do that, like cross things out?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. But if you cross, thank you, somebody asked a question. If you cross it out, that means the reader's not to read it. And I've seen students cross out things that were right but because
Okay.
they're crossed out. So make sure before you cross it out that you
Yeah.
really mean to cross it out. And we'll talk about contradictions in just a minute because that's an important part of it too. Or if you're going back and realize you left something important out and you want to put it in the margin, perfectly okay.
Okay.
Perfectly okay. The readers know that you're under a lot of time pressure and that you're going to make some mistakes in terms of, and they don't want to penalize you for that. They want you to get credit for that. Anyway, as we'll explain in a couple of minutes, every reader has a partner. And if I were a reader and I got this essay, the first thing I'd do is wait till my partner finished the essay that he or she was working on. Say, would you take a look at this? And I'd have that partner try to read it. Okay? And then if they couldn't read it together, they have a supervisor called a table leader that's supervising the table of 6, 7, 8 people that they're reading at. The person who got that essay would take it to the table leader and say, I'm struggling with this one. Would you take a look at it? And the table leader would try to read it. And if the table leader couldn't read it, well, the table leader has a partner. And he or she would look at his partner and say, take a look at this. And if they couldn't read it, they'd take it to the person who's in charge of the room, a person called the question leader. That's the role I played the last 5 years of the reading, the question leader. And if one of those got to me, how much time would I put into it? Almost none. Because I know that 4 other sets of eyeballs that looked at that. And we've got to read 500,000 essays. Okay. But trust that every effort will be made. By the way, this isn't the fault of the student, I don't think. I think that's the fault of the teacher. Because presumably this student wrote that way all year long. Okay. And the teacher at some point should have said to that student, you can't write. I can't read this. Now, it could be that that's a medical problem. There are certain muscular and neurological conditions that make it possible for people to write. But there is an accommodation for that in the AP exam. And that teacher should have helped that student find out, and if it was some sort of medical issue, they should have gotten a doctor's note, and they could have word processed their test. They could have done it that way. But if the teacher just looked at this kind of work all year long and said, yeah, I sort of see what he means, and gave it a score, that teacher dropped the ball. Yeah, I don't think a lot of the responsibility here goes to the student. I think that's a teacher that let that student down by allowing the student to think that this was okay. But it can't be read, okay? You can't get points on it. Here's what the storage room looks like. This is half of it. There are other rows beyond. And by the way, I can no longer take any photographs of the reading. 2 years ago, they put the kibosh on that. They're worried about social media. I don't know what they're worried about. But all of the photos that you're going to see are from before that. So each of these folders has 25 essays in it. Okay? They are randomized. So there's a group of aides that shuffles them all together in a particular way. So it's not like 3 of those folders just contain essays from CF kids. And when a reader picks up that essay, the reader doesn't know the name of the student. The reader doesn't know the sex of the student. The reader doesn't know if the student is a senior or a junior or a sophomore or in some cases a 9th grader. There are a smattering of 9th graders that take the AP Psych test every year. The reader doesn't know how the student did on the multiple choice portion of the test. The reader doesn't know how the student did on the other essay question. The reader doesn't know what school the student attended, the name of the student's teacher, the region of the country it came from. The only thing that's on there is your little College Board identification number. Now, why would they go to that level of secrecy?
They don't want the readers to be biased.
Why not?
Well, I mean, if you're reading, you see the kids from Cedar Falls.
Exactly. Or kids from Iowa, or I think girls or boys are better prepared than the other gender. Or if I've seen some others from this school and I know they're good. So just like you learned that in research, it's important for the researcher to be blind, to cut out on potential confounding variables, and we need to be blind for the same reason. Okay? We don't know anything else about that student except what their handwriting's like, and whether or not they follow directions on writing in dark blue or black ink. Okay? All of it is beyond that. So all that work is done before we get there. Purpose of the reading. We need to develop a reliable, valid, efficient rubric. Reliable means that no matter which reader picks it up, it's going to treat it the same way. You don't want to get your score based on whether you had an easy reader or a hard reader. Okay? Every reader has to treat every essay the same way, which is a really hard thing to do. It needs to be valid. And the way we really measure this is kind of informally. So often you'll read through an essay and you're using the rubric that you're being given to use. And sometimes that's uncomfortable. I've never been in a situation where it's the rubric I would have written. They're written by committee, okay, which means they're awkward in some ways. So you'll see this and say, oh, the rubric says I got to score that. I don't think it's very good. But if it's my opinion versus the rubric, who do I have to go with? The rubric. I have to surrender to the rubric. So I give that point. And then maybe later on they get 2 more points that I don't think are very good, but the rubric indicates they deserve them. So we get through to the end, and I add it up, and the student has earned 6 points on the essay, and I think they deserve 3. What score do I give them? 6. That doesn't happen very often. Sometimes it happens the other way, where you go through and the student ends up doing better. Okay? You get this really nice paragraph, and this student really got this. Oh, wait a minute, it doesn't quite meet the rubric standard. Okay, so you can't give them credit, can't give them credit. But that hardly ever happens. 99 times out of 100, you finish an essay and kind of think back, is this the right score? And yep, that's pretty good. That's the validity part of it. Okay, the scores can't be way out in left field. And it's got to be efficient because we all want to go home after a week. Okay, so we've got to finish the job on time. So we don't have time to make complex decisions often. That's why the simple subject and verb rule on what constitutes an essay, because we can apply that quickly. Okay, so we want to be able to do that very, very quickly. We need to get the readers trained. Yes?
Does every AP Psych student that takes the test get the same AP Psych essay question?
No, and I wasn't going to talk about that, but there are 2 operational questions that are given to well over 90%. But there's also a makeup test. So if you have a state tennis meet that day, or if you're sick on that day, there's a makeup test day. They get a different test. There's also an international test because they really worry about being compromised by electronic communication. So imagine a kid in New York who sits down to take the test at 1 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time on May 4th and has a camera where they photograph the essay questions and then sells those to 100 kids on the West Coast who then have 3 hours to prepare for the test. And when you expand it beyond our country, then it gets even wilder. So kids who take the test in, say, English language schools, military schools, private schools around the world, they'll take a different version of the test. And sometimes they do this to make sure that they're all equated. So in schools the size of Cedar Falls or greater, sometimes they'll send 2 versions of the same test to the same school. And half kids will get one and half kids get the other. That way they can learn which version is more difficult than the other. Because the assumption is if you have 90 or 100 kids taking the test and you randomly assign half of them to this version and half of them to that version, they should get about the same score. So if one version scores 6 points easier, they know to adjust for that when they do their scoring. So not everybody gets the same test. It's a good question. Third purpose, to get them ready, to get them done. So that's what we're trying to do. I was going to show you this, but I'm not connected to the internet. Apparently there's some comedy in Canada called Mr. D. I've never seen the show, but they did a little promo where this guy, the social studies teacher, the typical social studies teacher, is teaching a bartender how to grade essays. And if you download this later, you can click on it if you want. It's kind of amusing. This, I think, I searched hard today to try to find a better image, but I think a lot of high school students, when you consider who's going to grade their essays, have this image of a deep, dark basement room with a bare light bulb and a grizzled old bastard with a red pen and a frown on his face going, no, 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 and marking things wrong. Okay? And it's not like that at all. It's more like this. You get a group of hundreds of people, all of whom are teachers, all of whom are good teachers, half who come from colleges, half who come from high schools. They want you to do well. It's very depressing at the reading to read 6 bad essays in a row. Okay, that is really, really unsettling. You begin to not only feel bad for those students, you think that the profession of psychology teaching is floundering. Okay, and it's unhappy. Okay? One of the best things to do with the reading is to pick up a brilliant essay and read it. You feel good. Okay? These people want to award you points. You have to earn them, but they're on your side. They want to see you do well. Now, I want you to do two things. I want you, when you're writing the essay, to consider that human beings are going to read it. Okay, these are not machine scored. Real people are going to read what you write. Okay, and you are trying to communicate to that person. Okay, try to personalize it just a little bit. It could be me. I could read your essays. Okay. Think that it's going to be somebody in a couple of years. Rogers could read your essays. How is the reading organized? We talked a little bit about this. We'll have 500 readers this year. There are 70 supervisors called table leaders. Each one supervises 7 or 8 readers. Several of these people, about a dozen of them, arrive 3 days early to develop the rubric. That blows people away. You're going to write your answers to the questions before they figured out how to score them. And this comes from long, hard experience. Every teacher will tell you stories about developing projects that they think are going to be brilliant, and you decide in advance how you're going to score it, and then you give it to students and they turn in their work, and you try to look at their work in comparison to what you expected, and what do you find? It's not the same. So we finally learned, let's wait and see what students wrote before we decide exactly how we're going to score it. So the very first step is to read essays for a half hour with no thought of scoring, just to see what's in there, okay? And then to build the rubric around that reality. Okay? So the rubric is going to match the way students approach the question. So that all gets hammered out when it's there. There are 2 question leaders, and each question leader has an assistant called a rubric master. Okay? And these are the people in charge of the 2 operational questions. Okay? Again, this year I'm going to be a table leader. I devoted myself because I'm not teaching full-time. But question leaders, the first couple days are very hectic because if the rubric doesn't work, you've got real problems. If you don't get the readers trained right, that's a real problem. After that, this is one of the easiest jobs there. I spent my time making sure there were toilet paper in the bathrooms and that kind of stuff. But the rubric master is the person that actually authors the rubric based on this discussion. And then one chief reader, person in charge of the whole thing, along with an assistant chief reader. Now, there are other people that I've left out to kind of simplify this. There are aides, there are people from Educational Testing Service, which is the company that the College Board hires to develop, administer, and score the test. There's a lot more to it than that. Readers are looking for specific points. The range, historically, there's never been an AP Psych essay that had fewer than 6 points. There's never been one that had more than 16. In recent years, it's been 6, 7, or 8. You can expect that. As the years have gone by, they're asking fewer readers to grade more essays. The increase in the number of readers has not increased proportionately with the number of essays. And it takes longer to score a 16-point rubric than it takes to score 6 or 7 or 8 points. So just for practical reasons, you can expect fewer points. It's almost always possible to tell how many points they're going to be. Ms. Rogers will probably ask you that on May 5th. And how many points are on the essays? You can't talk about them for the next day. You will probably know specifically how many are there. Some points will be easy and others hard. This comes through this discussion. And there's no way for you to know in advance which ones are going to be easy, which ones are going to be hard. Okay? So almost every year, I write the answers to the questions before the rubrics are developed, and I rarely get them perfect. I give myself 20 minutes to answer, and I just sit down, and I kind of scratch them off, and you end up setting the threshold on some of them high enough so that it becomes a problem. Others are so easy that you barely have to breathe on the paper and you score it. It's almost embarrassing. You're going to give credit for that? Yes.
Do you have to answer in the same order?
No, but you have to make clear which part of the question you're answering. Okay. So you always want to start by borrowing a few words from the prompt. So if you're asked to identify the independent variable, that paragraph should start, the independent variable in this research is. And that gives context to the whole paragraph. And you can put it anywhere in your essay you want, and the reader knows that's what you're talking about. Another really good question. The ultimate reason for this easy and hard thing, by the way, is so that your scores get spread out. If the whole rubric is too easy and everybody scores well, we've wasted your time. Because the well-prepared students and the poorly prepared students are all going to score well, and we can't use that data to determine who gets a 5, who gets a 4, who gets a 3. Does that make sense? Same thing if the entire rubric is too hard. There's a real effort to make sure that almost everybody is capable of scoring some of the points, okay, and hardly anybody is going to be capable of scoring all of the points. Your goal on the essay is to pick up how many? half of them. Okay, just worry about picking up half of them, and you'll be fine. This is that rubric development process. We've got essays that are out of the folders now, and notice, by the way, that there are textbooks strewn all the way around. We're constantly going back and referring to the textbooks to see how the different authors dealt with the points that are in the question, to make sure that we're tying the rubric to the way that students have been taught that information. This goes on for 2 days. It's wonderful argument time. I love this part of the process because it's interesting. A good free response question can be scored reliably. Better prepared students score higher. Good distribution scores, we've already talked about all this. Test development tries to make sure that content comes from more than one unit. Okay, you're not likely to find a question that's all developmental, or a question that's all personality, or a question that's all research methods. It'll come across from different units, sometimes in weird ways in order to accomplish this. And they do not want an essay where you can pre-memorize an answer and just vomit it out on paper. So they're going to work very hard to come up with something that's quirky and weird, which is going to be unsettling for you. You just take it, you read it, you take your 5 minutes to think it through, say, I don't know about this, but I think I can do this part, I think I can do that part. I can pick up half the points on this essay. And if you do that, you're going to be fine on your AP exam. Development principles, I'll try to get through this quickly. Use the words that you used in the class. Okay? They want some evidence that you learned the terminology of psychology. So when you use the word experiment, use it correctly. Okay? A lot of people in the media use experiment to indicate all research. A lot of research isn't experimental research, right? There's no effort to randomly assign, you don't have groups, there's no independent variable, and so forth. Don't use the word reward when you can use the word positive reinforcement. And there have been several rubrics that give credit for positive reinforcement, but not for the word reward. Use the terms you've used this year. If there's an opportunity to pick one of the vocabulary words, make sure you use that word. And this drives me crazy, because I hate misinformation. But if you write misinformation in your essay, points will not be deducted. You get credit for what you say right. You don't get penalized for what you say wrong. Now, let me give you one quick example of that. There was a question about hunger, probably 15 years ago now. And students were asked to write about the role of the brain. Okay? And the rubric said they had to discuss the role of the hypothalamus, right? Okay. Well, many students have learned, did you learn about the lateral and ventromedial hypothalamus? Okay. Many students tried to write about that, and some did it horribly. Some nailed it. It was great to read it. They used words like satiety and talked about fullness and a hunger trigger and a fullness trigger and all the rest of it. They had the parts right and so forth. But other people screwed it up horribly. I read one about the vertical and horizontal parts of the hypothalamus, which was located near the heart. Okay. It's as bad as it could possibly have been. But that person got credit. Because you get credit as soon as you put the word hypothalamus. Now, if some kid wants to go on and prove more knowledge, that's fine. But look, what about the kid who writes, the hypothalamus controls hunger, period, and another kid who thinks, well, maybe that's not enough. The hypothalamus controls hunger, and then talks all this nonsense because he doesn't remember it right. Is that really a worse answer than the other one? They both know with the hypothalamus. Okay, so you ignore the misinformation and give credit. So don't be afraid to write something. Okay, don't be afraid to write something. You're not going to be penalized if the detail is wrong. The only thing that you can't do is directly contradict yourself. You can't say that the independent variable is drug dosage, and then in the next sentence say the independent variable is test score, even though it is drug dosage. Because now you've directly contradicted yourself. You can't say this guy is blue, and then say this guy is yellow, and expect to get credit for one or the other. So don't put yourself where you're denying what you previously said. Okay, so I couldn't say it's the hypothalamus, and then say it's the hippocampus. I could say it's the hypothalamus and then say a bunch of crap about the hypothalamus after that. Does that make sense? Okay. Spelling and grammar don't matter. And there are a lot of people who take this test for whom English is not their first language. We do not try to penalize people if they dangle their participles and split their infinitives and get their subject verb agreement wrong. As long as there is a subject and a verb, okay, you can make grammatical and spelling mistakes as long as the meaning comes through. All right, I'm almost done. Here's what the reading rooms look like. They're in big convention centers. We've been in Kansas City for the past 5 or 6 years. This year we're in Louisville. We've been in Louisville once before. And each question gets one of these big rooms. Everybody specializes, by the way. If you're trained to read on one question, you'll probably continue to read that question all the way through. Although if one person reads faster or slower than the other, they'll sometimes retrain individually as they go through. Here's what you get. Here's what your essay book looks like. Here's your student number. That's the only thing we have. Scores are recorded here on a scan sheet. They're all in the order that they are in the booklet. We get a good eraser in case we make mistakes. So that's what the typical setup looks like. We've mentioned most of this. Essays are randomized. Scores are in a scanning sheet. We do reliability checks to make sure everybody's scoring the same. This is what table readers do. It's called back reading. So once the reader finishes a folder, the folder goes to the table leader's table, and that table leader will blindly sample 1 or 2 or 3 or sometimes 10 essays out of that booklet if the table leader's worried about that reader, and they'll read it blind. What does that mean? Not knowing how the reader scored it. Okay? And then when the table leader is scored it, compare scores, and if you're more than one off, that's a problem. And there's going to be a meeting, and sometimes that meeting can be pretty uncomfortable. Okay? So this happens frequently throughout. Some people think that every essay is read twice. That's certainly not true. But enough are read twice so that the table leader is comfortable. The table leader also gets statistics on each reader twice a day as to the rate of the reading and whether that reader is reading at above or below the group average, okay, whether they're scoring this particular point more frequent or less frequently. We have this whole ream of statistics you can look at. And then everybody gets a partner. Okay, so nobody's out there all on their own. Table leaders sit around the edge. Here's a staff waiting to get back read. They are there to support the readers. Okay. By the way, Kristen, the woman in blue, she's replacing me this year as the question leader on one of the questions. So, she'll do a good job. She's a high school teacher from Utah. 1992, the very, very first year, we had 4,000 exams, 21 readers. This was the whole group. This was what the reading looked like in 2007. We were at Clemson University. We didn't have aides when we were done. We had to walk up to that box all by ourselves and bring them in. We didn't have scan sheets. We actually had to write the number of the score on the back of the big booklet. But this process was pretty much the same. Here's what it looked like a couple years ago. And this is the opening meeting. There are a lot of people there. This woman, Liz Hammer, who I'm going to visit next Wednesday, by the way, she lives in New Orleans. She's the chief reader. She's the woman in charge. Rob used to be one of the question leaders. He was just here last week. Students do strange things in essays, including trying to put money in to bribe the readers. Okay, this doesn't work. This is kind of cute occasionally. They'll write little notes to the readers. You want to avoid that. You don't want to do anything that allows your reader to think that you're taking anything less than seriously. It's not a good time to tell jokes. It's not a good time to make personal asides. But we do collect these things every year. You get blank booklets. You get booklets that are just doodled in. You get racist and sexist diatribes. You get hate essays. You get suicide notes. Some of it's very, very troubling. There are procedures for all of that. But the suicide notes are particularly troubling because you take the test on May 4th and it's mid-June before we start to read them. So a lot of time has gone by. But there is a process then to identify that student and go back to the school authorities to try to give them a heads up that there may be a potential problem here. Lots of things that go on there. Why do people go and read? The reading itself is not particularly fun. But some of my best friends go, and one of the things the reading is go read and feed because you eat all day long. But usually at night you go out with friends or shopping, and it's just it's amazing to me how many really good friends I have across the country that I see once a year at the reading, and how much fun it is to go back and to be in touch with them and work on this process that seems so valuable and so important. As we try to give you guys the score that we would do. I think that's it. That's all I got. Okay, so if you're interested in looking at these later, you can access it here. I promised to be done early, I thought I'd be done earlier than this, but I would be more than willing to answer any additional questions